I think anything that, starts to consume our daily lives to the point that we're not able to meet our own basic needs, like that's a huge red flag that something is wrong in this situation.
In what ways have you seen a cult used as an environment for human trafficking? So more about as part of the cult's operations. Do you have some examples?
Well, again, like I'm not a cult expert, but I will say, like, from what I know of high demand groups, and I think like your description of like a homeschool situation where labor exploitation happens, I think a lot of groups rely on free or cheap labor. From a business perspective, labor is the most expensive part of running a business. And so when you have free or cheap labor, it's how you're able to undercut the competitor with your products and services because you don't have as much overhead. And so if you have a cultic group that is providing or creating products or services, and they're using free labor, like it treads this very, very fine line between like I'm volunteering my time or I'm giving of my time to this group freely to I'm experiencing exploitation, and this is a gross violation of human rights and labor laws and all of these things. So I think that labor trafficking happens in a lot of cults. And I think, when we think of like historical groups, I forget which group it is, but they used flirty fishing. And that when you read what flirty fishing was, it was prostitution. So women were going out and soliciting men, and that's how they were recruiting more men into the group. But it was also a source of income for that group. So and at the end of the day, that's sex trafficking. That's using fraud and coercion, to get somebody to engage in commercial sex for that group. So I think those are a couple examples, but I do think that it happens more frequently than we talk about it.
I agree. And when I hear your explanation, I even think of mainstream religious groups where there can be this, sometimes it's unspoken, but sometimes it's spoken. I've heard many stories where it is directly stated that if you're not volunteering, basically the equivalent of a full-time job, then you are not serving as you're supposed to. You're not sacrificing as you're supposed to. And that's volunteer. So you're not paid. I think of a story of one young woman whom I was able to work with, and she was required to do so much volunteer work that she wasn't able to even continue her degree. She was actually negative every month on her bills because she couldn't work enough hours at her daytime job. And when she's like, I have to make a change, she was told that she was going against God's will for her life if she did that. And I'm like, does that fall into this category of trafficking with this coercion that's at the center of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anything that, starts to consume our daily lives to the point that we're not able to meet our own basic needs, like that's a huge red flag that something is wrong in this situation. On a much smaller scale, as a public speaker, I've been contacted by different groups and asked to come speak. And sometimes I speak for free, and sometimes there's an honorarium that comes with that. And what I have found over time is there's a lot of groups that expect you to speak for free and to tell your entire trauma history with no compensation. And these groups, they're few and far between, but they leave such like a lasting impression in my mind because they ask, well, why do you need money? Like, you should be doing this because you want other people to not experience these things. Like, yes, and I have children to feed and a roof to put over my head. And I do give so much of myself, but I get to choose when I give that. I shouldn't feel guilted into it or obligated to do that, or shamed into doing that. And I think it's very easy for those beliefs to kind of blow out of proportion to the point that, like your example, somebody is volunteering all of their time and they can't even meet their own basic needs and cover their expenses every month. it's just unrealistic at that point.
Yeah, unrealistic. And the shaming.
Mm-hmm.
You said this shame of, well, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to want to help. And it's like, yeah, but like, you're right. At the end of the day, you're going to be homeless. I mean, that's not effective. You're not going to be available to serve anyone when you're trying to get your basic needs met. We don't have time for extras when we're trying to figure out where we're sleeping. So it just gets to the point where it's absurd. And for those who are listening, who are thinking, well, that sounds extreme, this is happening. These kinds of things happen all over the place. So, and it's not, again, when we look more broad and we don't just focus on the most extreme situations, we're like, wow, to some degree or another, this is actually really prevalent.